What's going on, Packer fans? Welcome into a all-new happy hour here on the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. I think we all need a little bit of a happy hour based on where this Packers team is at 2-5. One of these times, it's going to be a happy hour the week of a victory, maybe, kind of, sort of, maybe, perhaps. But appreciate you guys being here. Happy to answer any questions that you guys have. Obviously, live Q&A. Shoot me your questions in the comments. Any super chats will go to the top of the list, and we'll make sure that I get to all of them. Probably be here for about 30 to 45 minutes today. So again, happy to answer anything that you got. John, you've got a new Glarus today. Which one? I like Spotted Cow. I like a lot of their different stuff, though. They got the big bottle, like the cherry thing. I forget what it's called, but that thing's amazing. Ready to watch Josh Myers play the best football of his career on Sunday. Oh, I don't know if I can talk about Josh Myers anymore. I will say this. I think there's like levels to players who are struggling, right? Josh Myers to me is struggling overall. He's below average on, a game to game basis. He's more often than not grading in the negative. Is he probably one of the 32 best centers in the league? I think he probably is. There has to be a 32nd ranked center that's still a starting caliber center in the NFL. Maybe that's Josh Myers. Maybe he's in the, somewhere in that 25 to 32 range, whatever it is. What I mean by there being different levels, I think like when we see Royce Newman out on the field, like that's a level that's a step below where you're like, I don't exactly understand how he necessarily has a roster spot on the team. I don't think Josh Myers is at that level where you're just like, how is this guy even on the team? And again, I do think there's a world where if you have four really good starters around Josh Myers, and if he's like your fifth guy, you can probably get by with that. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. It's just the thing that's so confusing about it, as I've said all week, is maybe he is playing better football than he did the past 2 years. Last year was really bad football from Josh Myers, so it's within the realm of possibility. I just don't get like the bravado and like just the exuberance of like, yeah, he's like really playing well. It's like, okay, it's he's not really playing well. We don't need to go that far with it. And then the funnier one that it doesn't even get talked about from Goot is that right before Josh Myers, he said he's really liked how Rasheed Walker stepped in and stepped up. He got benched last week. Rasheed Walker got benched a week ago. You can't be super excited about how he has stepped into that role when the week before you're talking, he got benched. So it doesn't matter. It's a GM's job is to lie every once in a while. It's part of the gig, but it's so interesting. I don't get it. All right, Arnaldo, great to see you again. What would be my ideal definition of cutting loose Aaron Jones? Yeah, I just had some fun with that on the old Twitter sphere. I said, because it said Matt LaFleur's ready to cut Aaron Jones loose. And I said, I hope they have a conversation with him in person first, after all the vitriol over not contacting Rasul Douglas in person. I don't get that. Like, you make a transaction, you get a hold of him immediately. The GM called him personally. The head of the organization called him personally. I don't see any faux pas or negative here with the way that they handled the Rasul Douglas trade, at least from a personal standpoint. I love the story that Rasul hung up on Goody. Like, that's very funny to me. But yeah, so anyway, I was having fun with that, of saying at least before they cut Aaron Jones loose, I hope they have a conversation with him in person first. But I digress. I would like to see Aaron Jones, if he's anywhere near 100%, get 20 touches in the game, not 20 handoffs, or at least like if he gets 12 carries, I'd like to see him at least get 8 targets in the passing game, something like that. 14 carries, 6 targets in the passing game. If he drops 1 or 2 of them or whatever, like he had a drop last week, that's not Matt LaFleur's fault for not getting him the football. He tried to, whatever, but I'd like to see, 20 attempts plus targets for Aaron Jones in this game. If it ends up being a little bit more, fantastic. That's great. But I don't think it can be much less than that anymore. He needs to touch the ball as much as he possibly can at this point. Parker, who would be a bigger loss if they can't go Rudy Ford or Quay Walker? I'll say Quay. I don't think Green Bay has the backup inside linebackers. I think we saw with Isaiah McDuffie, there's a limit to what McDuffie can do on the field. And I thought Eric Wilson actually played well. I'd like to actually see more Eric Wilson than McDuffie if Quay can't go this week. I think I actually think Wilson pairs better with Devondre Campbell anyway. So they could probably get by with Devondre and Eric Wilson this week. But I think Quay is just a little bit of a better player than Rudy Ford, although Rudy Ford has arguably played better so far this season. I think the thing that gets lost a little bit in translation too is like you can go like when you break down and grade every single game, you can go 8 or 9 plays in a row where like the safety didn't even wasn't even involved in the play. So I think you can probably get by a little bit more there too. I would be interested, and I hope that if Rudy can't go, we actually get to see a little bit of Anthony Johnson Jr. this week. I'd like to see what him in more of a starting role looks like, and him getting more playing time. Those are valuable snaps for him. You do start getting to a point if you've got Carrington Valentine and Anthony Johnson Jr. playing significant snaps in the secondary where you have a lot of youth and inexperience back there, which is maybe not a great duo, but I think it's close, but I'll say I'd rather have Quay going this week than Rudy Ford. Alex, thanks for the question. Regardless of if you think the Rodgers trade was the correct move, it feels like he was at least somewhat correct about play calling, keeping veterans, holding others accountable. Thoughts on this? Yeah, I think so, Alex. I think we're learning that there is a level of where this team is at right now that's just not good enough. And it certainly looks like there was a piece of Aaron Rodgers that was maybe holding the final strings of this team together. It's tough to say. I really wish Aaron was playing in New York so we could get that side of the evaluation as well. If Aaron just goes out and struggles and everything's chaos in New York, you could easily point to and be like, well, same thing's kind of happening over there. If he goes up and has an MVP season in New York, you can be like, all right, well, he very much was still playing at a high level and things clearly weren't good enough in Green Bay. So I hate that we don't get that part of the evaluation, but things minus Aaron Rodgers and with a lot of youth on the roster certainly don't look great at the moment. A lot of the things that he was preaching and saying about maybe where the offense was at, needing to maybe simplify things, get more veterans on the field. I think you can certainly see it in his eyes a little bit more based on what's gone on so far this season. But yes, if anyone missed my video and podcast this week, I still think regardless of the ineptitude of this current Packers offense and team, I still think it was very much the right move. Now, what they did with those assets and things like that, those are all part of the conversation we can have at another time. But based on all the things I went over in that video, I still think it was the right decision to make the move when they did. Preston, thank you so much for the super chat. Appreciate you. Do you expect this offense to at least show signs this week against this soft coverage defense, or expect the same bleep different week? So going into this season, I know you asked about the offense, but I'm going to talk about the defense for a second. Going into this season, people were asking like, hey, is this year that we can finally trust the defense? And this defense could maybe be a top 15 or top 10 defense. And I said, I will not trust this defense ever again until we get to the end of the season. And in the statistics, it shows by all accounts, they were a top 10 defense. At that point in time, I will point to it and say, look, they had a top 10 defense. We've been fooled too many times to say, all right, this is the year they're going to have a good defense. They're probably not until they prove us otherwise. And that was a prescient comment because as we've gone into this season, still not even anything close to a top 10 nor top 15, nor a top 20 defense at this time for Green Bay. And I'll say the same thing right now about the offense. Until I see the offense go out and not be completely incompetent in the first half and actually be able to put some plays together, put a drive together, score points. They haven't scored a touchdown in the first half since the Falcons game in week 2. That is insane. And I've gone over the numbers on numerous occasions, but since the first half of that Saints game, 25 first half drives, 19 punts, 2 interceptions, 1 end of half, 4 field goal attempts, 3 field goal makes. 4 field goal attempts, 3 field goal makes. One of those was specifically due to a defensive turnover that got them in plus territory. The numbers are hideous. And until I see something different out on the field that makes me believe that this can be a competent offense moving forward, I'm taking the I will believe it when I see it approach with this offense right now. Jason, thank you so much. We shouldn't expect them to give Aaron Jones a lot of touches ever again. He's injured, about to turn 29, and they are purposely limiting him. Yes and no. The injury part, absolutely. I think, and I mentioned this the other day, and I'm losing track of where I mentioned it at this point, but I think it was actually on Pack-A-Day Live when I was talking to Paul and Sarah. I think this was going to be a year where we were going to legitimately see more Aaron Jones than ever because they had to. He was the veteran running back, and we saw how much involved he was in that Bears game early, up until the point where he got injured. This was going to always have to be an offense that revolved around Aaron Jones with all the youth and inexperience. The unfortunate part is that he got hurt in that Bears game, and we haven't seen a completely healthy Aaron Jones. And the last thing that you want to do is give him 20, 25 touches or whatever. And then all of a sudden he re-aggravates it. And now he's out another 5 or 6 weeks. So I think they were smart over the last couple of weeks to limit him as much as they did, just to make sure that he doesn't re-aggravate something or that he's not, incapable of playing for any chunk of the rest of the season. If he is legitimately healthy, I still think they are going to go back to wanting Aaron Jones to be the focal point of this offense. Now, as far as him getting a ton of touches or anything like that, Aaron has never been nor ever will be a 25 to 30 touch, a game player. That's just not the way that McCarthy wanted to use him. LaFleur wanted to use him. Anyone's wanted to use him. And I think you do have to be careful with just his general body type and how much he can handle in a given season. But I do think that 20 spot, again, it doesn't have to be 20 carries. It can just be 20 touches or targets, whatever it is. To get him in that range, I think is where you really need him to be the remainder of the season. To me, that's not overworking him or overtaxing him, not at his age. He's basically had the first half of the season off. And I'm not saying like he hasn't been working or things like that, but he's had very limited wear and tear on his body so far because of the injury. I think he can handle 20 touches for the remainder of the season. And that's where I would like him to be. And I think that's where Green Bay would really like him to be as well. Now, the other issue here is this team can't run block to save their lives. And you do have to remember as well that just handing it off to somebody, there was a couple of plays where they handed off to Jones or Dillon, and there's just 3 or 4 guys immediately in the backfield. If you can't move anyone in the run game and there's nowhere for those running backs to run, just handing it to Aaron Jones for the sake of handing it to him, just so we can get tackled 2 yards in the backfield, that doesn't serve a purpose either, other than to just be like, well, we got to get him his touches. So I think you have to be creative with it. I think you have to be smart about it. And you just got to figure out a way to run block better, because otherwise, you're going to have, 20 touches for, 50 yards, and that's not doing anyone any favors either. All that said, Aaron is one of the best people at making people miss in the backfield too. So you still have to you have to be creative, get him involved. And like I said, even if it's not running the ball, you got to get him his touches. All right, cap wise, when is the earliest we could reasonably compete again? I assume we'll still be taking our medicine in 2024. Quarterback play is obviously a factor too. Competitive is an interesting word. If you're saying when can they compete for a Super Bowl again, I think 2025, 26, if things go really, really right, is probably when you're looking at. They have the ability to be competitive in games right now, better than they have been. And I think that's the big thing that I wanted to see this year, not really caring so much if they're 0-17 or 17-0 or any. Well, it'd be great if they were 17-0, but we knew it was going to be some ups and downs, and somewhere around 8-9 or worse. But I wanted to see competitive games. I wanted to see competitive football. That's what I really wanted. And of course, progress and getting better over the course of time. Those are the things that I wanted to see out of this team. They have the ability to be more competitive in games and at least not lose by 14 points to the Vikings. They shouldn't have lost by 14 points to the Vikings last week if they can just get a couple of those red zone touches in. But, as far as like competing from a playoff standpoint, they can get to the playoffs next year if things start breaking in their favor. They need these young guys to start stepping up and playing better football. They need to hit on their early draft picks next year. They're going to have 5 top 100, 3 top 50 draft picks next year. They need to hit on some of those. I think they're going to probably have a little bit of salary cap to play with and maybe go out and get some people. I hope they're not overly aggressive with it, because I'd rather them kind of keep that money down the line when they are ready to compete. They need some things to go in their favor. Things have not been going in their favor and trending in the right direction. They've got 10 games for the remainder of the season to turn that around, to play with better fundamentals, to have better attention to detail, to learn how to win football games in this league. If you can start seeing this team play better football in December and, early January, however, I forget when their last game is, but last 3, 4, 5 games of the season, and we see them start legitimately putting some things together, playing complementary football, then sure, I think that they can go into next year feeling like they can compete at a higher level. Again, if some things break correctly. Again, Super Bowl, you're probably looking at 20, 25, 26, 27 beyond, and you still need a lot to break right in order for those things to happen. Getting back to just like from your salary cap question though, next year, what I would ideally love for this team to do is take their medicine. If we're being realistic, they're not competing for a Super Bowl in 2024 either. So take your medicine, get off as many bad contracts as you can get off, and take your medicine next year. And I know that sucks to hear. The Bakhtiari situation is really ugly, but the good thing about Bakhtiari's contract is he's not on contract post 2024. So even if you have to eat that entire thing next year because of an injury settlement or whatever, or if you just have to keep him on the roster on IR and he can't play, at least 2024 is the final year on the contracts or on the books for Bakhtiari. I'd like to see them do the same thing with Aaron Jones and Preston Smith and just get off some of those deals so that in 2025, you actually have a blank slate. You have money that you can spend, and now you can start being a little bit more financially responsible moving forward. All right. What else we got here? Richard, I'm intrigued on this one. Aaron Nagler talks about how general managers draft for potential and what a player can become rather than what they did in college. If a player didn't develop well, isn't a huge part on coaching? It can be both, right? It can be that they missed the evaluation. GMs and scouts miss on evaluations all the time. It can be that the coaches didn't coach them up appropriately and didn't put them in a position to succeed correctly. Those are absolutely things that can happen as well. What you ideally want is that your coaching staff and general manager are on the same page, knowing what type of players can be successful in the offense and defense that you want to play. And I don't think there's like a major issue there, but I don't always think that especially on defense, that the players that they've acquired on defense match exactly what they wanted this Joe Barry system to be. I will always, always, always be more on the side of what your GM should be responsible for is drafting the best players possible, regardless of what the scheme fit is. And it should be up to the defensive coordinator and offensive coordinator and head coach to figure out the best ways to utilize those players. I don't necessarily need a system where like I have to have, this exact type of player. Like just get me good football players. If I'm a good coach and a good coordinator, you get me good football players, I will find a way to put a scheme and a system together and plays together that I can win with really good football players. And if I can't, as a coach, find a way to utilize really good football players, then that's on me. That's not on the GM. But there can be both sides of this. GMs and scouts can miss on players and miss on the evaluation. And sometimes coaches and coordinators can either not get the most out of those players, not teach them the skills that they need to be successful, or not put them in the best positions to be successful. I think all of that has happened to some capacity, in some capacity. I also think that from a GM standpoint, I've gone over this quite a bit. I think the idea of drafting for potential, it can work. We've seen it work with a player like Rashawn Gary, but there's less and less time to develop these players. More and more coaches are in the mindset of how can we get ready to play this week? And we don't see the same level of, I think, like exponential development out of these players. If you don't see a really good player by like year 2, more often than not, they're just never going to become a really good player. And a lot of times, if you don't see that spark like right away, like if you don't at least see some of those flashes right away, you have to question if those are ever going to come. And again, from a Green Bay standpoint, they have done it over the years better than I think other teams have. You also get to a point of like Rashawn Gary is another great example of this, where you get to year 3 and year 4, where he's finally really having this massive impact. And you immediately get to the point where you have to give him a huge contract. Sometimes the most beneficial thing is in football is when you can have players playing at a very high level in year 1 and year 2, when they're on extremely super cheap deals. When you've got a Justin Jefferson for Minnesota, who is like playing as the best wide receiver in football in year 2, when he's making absolutely nothing on that contract, that is a huge, huge benefit. When we know that that's the case for quarterbacks, when you can have a quarterback who's on a rookie deal, but it doesn't just, stop at quarterbacks. It's all positions. If you've got a player on a 4-year deal, super cheap contract in that rookie span, and they're playing amazing football, there's a huge benefit to that. So I do think that, draft and develop, whether it's dead or it's dying or it's just not having the same impact that it once did, I do think Green Bay has to kind of take a look at that and figure out, because I think the best teams and the best players are the ones that are coming in and finding success right away, who have shown that they can play at a high level in college. They come to the NFL, they make that easy transition and make a real big impact from day one on the NFL level. Jay Western says it's dead. We will see. All right, Tom, have we slept on Kenny Clark significantly underperforming his contract, 61 PFF grade this season? His play was always was a ways from elite in 21 or 22 either. Feels like it's barely being discussed. Kenny's a really interesting one. I think personally, I have Kenny graded a little bit higher than what PFF does. It's not by a ton. You have seen a legitimate decline in Kenny from just his prime over the last 3 years. And I think this year is probably trending either this year or last year. Probably it's going to be close as to which one will be his worst year. But we're definitely not seeing the same impact down in and done out from Kenny Clark that we have in the past. And I think most people are like recognizing that from an impact standpoint, it's just not there. Now, he still has like a flash play or two every single game and is still mostly making an impact. Why I think it's hard to completely evaluate Kenny. Watch how much he gets double teamed in a game. Like teams are making sure that Kenny Clark on the interior is not the one that's going to beat them, and making sure more often than not that he is the double team player. And a lot of times he's still at least like maintaining ground in that situation. If you're double teamed a lot, your goal isn't to necessarily win on that play. It's just to kind of hold your ground and let everyone else make the play because you're taking on two guys. And you will see that quite a bit from Kenny. So I don't think Kenny's playing bad football by any stretch of the imagination. He's not playing elite football by any stretch of the imagination either, but he's playing solid to good football. And I think Kenny's probably still the least of Green Bay's problems right now. If you want to make the argument that he's underperforming his contract, I think that's totally fair. But I think Kenny's fine. And I don't think that, again, that's anywhere near the biggest concern at the moment. Would I like to see him dominate at a higher level and with more consistency? Yeah, that'd be fun. That'd be great. But he's doing fine. It's just he gets a lot of double teams and he still is making a play or two per game. But yeah, I do think from a contract standpoint, you can make that argument. All right, Preston, thank you so much. Let me get this up here if my mouse wants to work. All right. Another interesting thing we'll be evaluating our game plan, the run. They run a similar defense to us, although we don't have number 99. The X's and O's will be interesting to see how Matt schemes this game up. Yeah, this is the soft zone coverage bowl, if you will. Which team can play softer zone coverage will be, I don't know, the loser, I guess. I'm not sure anymore. But there are going to be plays that Green Bay can connect on, taking advantage of the defense the way that other teams take advantage of Green Bay's defense. I think it's going to really be up to Jordan in this one to take what's given to him. There was a time I thought starting with the Detroit game where I thought Jordan maybe didn't take some throws that were there for him and was kind of going a little bit more big game hunting and wanting to see what was going to develop down the field. And by the time he got to that point, he was sacked or under pressure, had to throw it away, whatever it might be. I think it's going to be very up to Jordan to make sure that he's quickly getting through his progressions. And if he senses pressure, if there's nothing available downfield, he's taking those checkdowns. Those checkdowns have been available for Jordan at times. He hasn't always taken them. This is going to be a key game for Jordan to take those checkdowns, making sure he's moving the sticks, just kind of keeping things in a reasonable down and distance. We have seen Green Bay cannot live in 3rd and long in any capacity. They can't dig themselves out of those situations. So just taking what's there, taking what's given, and not trying to do too much is going to probably be the formula for success for Green Bay and Jordan Love. I can't talk today. My apologies, guys. All right. Matthias, I'm interested in this one. After rewatching Goot's interview, I can't help but think this is the first time he has not been all in on Love. There was a big doubt there, or was it just me? I think he's probably just being a little bit realistic. I don't think he was ever all in on Love. I think his commentary all along is Jordan needed to play. And I think that was always true to some extent. Like they needed to evaluate him. They needed to get him out on the field and see what he could do. I've said for a while now, like the worst thing that you could have happen is that you move up in the draft and draft Jordan Love. You develop him for 3 or 4 seasons. You never see him play. He goes somewhere else and tears it up. I'll say the same thing now. You still need these last 10 games to evaluate him because you don't want to get to a situation where you make the evaluation, you decide you move on from Jordan Love, you draft a rookie quarterback in the 1st round next year, you move Jordan somewhere else and he goes and tears it up somewhere else. You cannot miss on this evaluation if you're Green Bay, especially because the opportunity cost would be A, Jordan Love's playing great football somewhere else, and B, you took a quarterback instead of someone like Marvin Harrison Jr., who if all of a sudden Jordan is tearing it up, that would be quite the dynamic duo that you could potentially have. So this is a really huge evaluation for Green Bay. On the flip side, you can't pass on a Caleb Williams or a Drake May if you're in a position to get them for the sake of keeping Jordan Love, and he goes on to have a less than stellar career. And, Caleb Williams or Drake May go on to have, Hall of Fame caliber careers. That would be a huge indictment as well. So the first evaluation is Jordan Love, making sure that they get that evaluation right. And then, of course, evaluating the draft class independent of that, and then making your firm determination from there in which direction that you want to go in, assuming you can even get in the conversation for those 2 quarterbacks. But Again, I don't think he was all out on Love. I don't think he was ever all in. I think the big thing that Goots wanted from day one is the ability for him to get on the field and make this evaluation. I think the frustrating thing for Goot is what kind of came out in that interview is that they're having a really tough time evaluating anything because everything is so chaotic and nothing is going right. There are variables everywhere and there are very few constants. And when you're trying to get, you want your variable to be Jordan Love and everything else to be a constant so you can make the evaluation of your variable, which again, in this case would be Jordan, but you've got variables everywhere else, which is making it near impossible. And as Goody said, not just to evaluate Jordan Love, but to evaluate everything on offense and really on this team as a whole. I think that's what makes it really, really tough. And I'm in the same place. Not that I have the GM or scouting acumen that Goody or anyone else does in that front office or coaching staff, but it's really hard for me as I'm going through the all 22 each week to be like, all right, like, is this, just because there's so much around Jordan that's breaking down that, guys in the wrong spots, routes not being run precisely, pass protection breakdowns, blitz pickup issues, like just all of it that you would like to see a little bit more stability around Jordan so that you can make a firm evaluation of him. This is I said this on Pack-A-Day Live this week as well. This was the first week that something just didn't feel right with Jordan for me, that it was a little bit more of like, all right, there are passes that are there that you're either just not getting to or like are just underthrown. The mechanics are wonky. You'll see times where I talked about this on numerous occasions this week, but the Romeo Doubs play where Doubs is like, and he's got to throw all the way across the field and Doubs comes streaking open at the end of the play and he kind of ad-libs and buys time. He throws that ball effortlessly and it's like 60 air yards on a diagonal and he overthrows Romeo. My point's not that he overthrew him. It's just that, okay, like on that play, the zip looked insane. It was like an effortless, like 60-yard throw on a line that just looked like, okay, the arm is legit. And there are other times where it's like the throw is a little noodly. It's like fluttering in air. It doesn't look precise. It doesn't look accurate. And you're just wondering, like, I don't know what the issue is. I know some of it's the mechanics, the footwork. I know just all of that stuff needs to come together a little bit better. But I want to see a little bit more consistency from Jordan on what he can control. And this past week was the first one where I'm like, it just seems a little bit off right now for Jordan, independent of everything else. But I certainly would love another 10 games this year to keep an eye on it, because there's also a handful of plays every game that he makes that make you go, okay, like that looks special. Like that looks really, really great. I want to see more of that. And if he can start putting it together, like I think we have to remember that, yes, this is year 4 for him, but he's still 8 starts into his career. And, a quarterback's resume is not complete at that point. And there is a lot of meat on the bone for Jordan Love for what he can become. And there's still a lot of potential there, in my opinion. So I don't think it's trending great. And like I said, this last week was the first one where I'm like, I'm not feeling it right now a ton. But I still think there's a lot there. And like I said, I think it's really important for these next 10 games for them to evaluate him in every way imaginable to make sure that they're making the right determination on him moving forward. All right. So a lot of chats come in. What do we got? Well, so Kelsey, so Packers only trade away stars. They don't trade away otherwise. Well, the first thing I will say is Rasul is not a star. We're not talking like Rasul is on the same level as like Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams. These are really freaking good players having a really nice season. Not a star in this league, but they traded him away. And then they traded Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers. But a part of the reason that goes into that equation, and the part of the reason you do that, is you're actually getting value in return. A lot of Green Bay's trades that they could have made at the deadline this year would have netted any real positive value in return. Preston wasn't going to get you more than a 6th or 7th pick at best, and just because of some of the contracts that they're tied to. So yeah, in all actuality, yeah, the players that you're going to trade are ones that you're going to get a legitimate value for in return. Obviously, there were extenuating circumstances surrounded both the Aaron Rodgers and the Devontae Adams trade, where Devontae was gone, he was out. He said he wanted to go play back home. The Raiders were willing to give a 1st and 2nd round pick in return. So that like there was that whole situation. Green Bay was willing to pay him the way that he wanted to be paid, but he still wanted out. So that was that issue. And then with Aaron, of course, you were just in no man's land with the contract, with whether or not he wanted to play, with him probably wanting to play elsewhere. Some of the issues, it was just time for every party to go in a different direction. So there's a lot that goes into that. Well, uh, that's partially true, but more value than that overall. You had Rodgers or Devontae go for a 1 and a 2, which is good value. And then you had Aaron go for a 2, which was almost a 1, a 2 next year that could have been a 1, but they got unlucky. And you moved up in the first round as well. So, like, the overall value was still more than a first round pick. If they wanted to move the 2 second round picks to get up into a first rounder, so we could have called it a first rounder, they easily could have done so. So, yes, it's still the value there overall was fine. I don't have any issue with the value they got in return for either of them. And again, just unlucky that Rodgers ended up not playing. All right. Cam, with Rasul gone, how do you think the cornerback room could or should shake out 2023 and 2024? So Jair's still going to be here for a while. I don't think Jair's going anywhere. Keyshawn will be interesting, but it wouldn't shock me if he ended up elsewhere in 2024. And then, kind of as we're discussing Jordan Love and making sure you get a full evaluation on him, I think these next 10 games are going to really be for a full evaluation of Carrington Valentine as much as possible. And as soon as Eric Stokes comes back, you're going to want as much of an evaluation of him as well. Now, my guess is, regardless of what happens and what, with those evaluations, Carrington Valentine, Eric Stokes, and Jair Alexander will be 3 of the corners on your roster next year, all under contract. And they're not going to give up on a first round pick or somebody that's probably as talented as Carrington Valentine, unless Valentine just goes out as an awful remainder of this year and sucks in training camp next year, then he's not guaranteed a spot. But I would assume that Valentine, Stokes, and Jair start as your 3 primary corners, but I think they'll be active in the draft and evaluating that class and seeing, I think I've said evaluating a million times, my apologies, but they'll take a look at the draft class next year and see if there's players that they can add to that room. And they'll have to see what they want in Keyshawn Nixon as well, if they want to bring him back. I don't think anything else is too, I don't think they're too worried about losing Corey Ballantyne, Innis Gaines, anyone else like that. So starts probably with Valentine, Stokes, and Jair, and then they're going to have to add some depth to that room moving forward. Lee, they did not get a first and a second for Rodgers. They got a second last year, a second this upcoming year, and then they moved up from in the first round 2 spots. So they did not get a 1 for Rodgers. They got what could have been a 1 for Rodgers if he played 65% of the snaps, but he will not due to his injury. So that turns into a second round pick next year. So no first round for Rodgers. All right. What else we got? Mario, you think Aaron Jones gets that full workload this time around? I know Matt likes to gaslight people, but I feel like he might be truthful this time around. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit at the onset. I do think they're going to use Aaron as much as possible this week. Like I said, the run blocking needs to be better. It can't just be that Aaron gets the ball and runs into a brick wall every play. So they need to be able to do that. But I think, I don't know. I've had the wool pulled over my eyes so many times with Aaron Jones. And I swear to God, if we get to the end of the game and he's had 8 touches again and the press conference is saying, we need to get Aaron more involved. I don't know what we're going to do at that point, but I do think the game plan is going to be heavy Aaron Jones this week, if I had to guess. Only for me to be completely disappointed on Sunday. All right. I don't know if I can say the E word again after saying it so much, but should this be the year that they will be evaluating all coaching staff? I know we wanted to have the great semantic debate of 2023 when everyone was like, it's a rebuilding year. No, it's not a rebuilding year. It's a reboot. It's a refresh. It's a regeneration. I don't care. What I called this from day one, as soon as the Rodgers trade got made, was an evaluation year. And this was a year. And that's why I think they brought so many other things back, was to try to keep as much constant as they could, but to kind of evaluate everything. Because I think you could get to the end of last year and kind of point at everyone and be like, well, it was their fault. It was his fault. It's your fault. I think now without Rodgers, you get a much better feel for where this team is at overall. Spoiler, it's not great. But I think Matt LaFleur, very much under evaluation. Brian Gutekunst, with no Aaron Rodgers, very much under evaluation with what he's done with all that extra draft capital from Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams. Really important that he gets that stuff right. Joe Barry, very much under evaluation. Jordan Love, very much so. Like, they are taking a look and a deep dive at everything. And now you get to see how this entire year plays out. Still very early. They got 10 games left. but they need to really figure out what is the root cause of the problem. I was talking earlier today, and I said it's kind of like when you are like every Sunday, if we're like taking this from like a doctor's approach, every Sunday we see all these symptoms pop up of a very unhealthy, in this case, we'll say team. And there are symptoms everywhere. And you know that there is something that's the root of the problem, but we're not exactly sure what it is yet. And you have to keep going through all of these tests to figure out, all right, what's the actual issue? Because we see poor quarterback play, we see poor offensive line play, we see a team that can't win football games, can't put points on the field in the first, or points on the board in the first half. You can't see a defense that can get off the field. Like, we see all of these symptoms popping up of something that's very sick and wrong. But figuring out and diagnosing exactly what the biggest issue is of all of these symptoms has been really hard to figure out. And that's what we need the rest of these 10 games to be is this Goody? Is the evaluation on the players just not good enough? Is it the coaching? And the coaching just can't figure out a way to put these very talented players in a position to be successful and coach them up to get them to the level that they need to be at so you can actually go out and win football games. Is it the defensive coordinator? Is it the players? Is it certain players that are bringing everyone else down? Those are things that need to be determined. And that's what the remainder of this season, it should be about two things: making all of those determinations, but B, also hopefully seeing things trend in the right direction and show signs of progress so that hopefully you feel confident that some of those issues have been ironed out and that you're making progress going into next year. All right. All I see is Lee and Kelsey arguing. Quit arguing. It's a reevaluate year. Sure, that's another R. We got another R in there. That's fine. I'm totally cool with that. All right, this is an interesting one. Cam, do you think it's worth talking about bringing 33 back in 2024? I was talking about this a little bit earlier today as well, but the contract for Jones is really interesting. And Aaron is like the heartbeat of the team. Now, some of these injury issues are going to be an issue, but you look at this from a salary cap standpoint. Here's what the issue becomes with Aaron Jones. And give me just 1 second to pull this up really quick. So you release Aaron Jones. Let's say they release Aaron Jones next year, right? They will take on $12.3 million in dead salary. Now, they could split that up between 2024 and 2025 if they wanted to. But in some capacity, they're going to take on $12.3 million for him to not play on the team in dead cap hits. And that's a tough pill to swallow, right? You're going to take all that. And ideally, in what I would do in that situation is take it all on in 2024, take your medicine, save a little bit of money. And then in 2025 should be your goal to be more financially solvent and be able to go out and actually spend a ton of money. They can do that by, getting off the Bakhtiari contract in 2024, the Jones contract, and the Preston Smith contracts in 2024. The direction where I would probably go. But Green Bay has not shown a propensity to kind of rip the Band-Aid and do that in any real way. So let's go the other direction. Let's say he plays next year. If he plays next year, he's on a $17.1 million cap hit next year. And then he has $6.6 million in dead cap hits the following year when all those void years come to fruition and you have to pay the piper for kicking things out for a while. So what you end up with and what your ultimate question is, and maybe there's another restructure for Aaron Jones, which I'm also not a huge fan of because that just keeps kicking things down the road. But if there's not a restructure, your question is, all right, do you want to pay Aaron Jones $12.3 million to not be on your team? Or do you want to pay him $23.7 million to be on your team? What it boils down to is it's basically a 1 year, because you're going to have to pay the $12 million no matter what, right? It basically amounts to a 1 year, $11 million deal to bring Aaron Jones back next year. So that's barring a contract restructure, you as a GM have to ask yourself, if Aaron Jones were a free agent, would you go out and sign him to a 1 year, $11 million deal? Now, part of that is like $5 million this year, $6 million next year. It would split between seasons. But if Aaron Jones were a free agent, would you sign him to a 1 year, $11 million deal? If the answer is yes, you bring him back. If the answer is no, then you work on a restructure or you release him and figure out the rest later. As much as it pains me to say, and I love Aaron Jones to death, and I would love to see him back on the team in some capacity, I would much rather see this team get financially responsible and better off and like have a blank slate in 2025 and just get off of the Preston and Bakhtiari and Jones deals. But those are not easy decisions. And as I will always say, easier for me to say in my basement in this leather chair than it is at 1265 when you're dealing with real human lives. And like I said, I love Aaron Jones to death and will be very sad and disappointed on the day that he is no longer a Green Bay Packer, because he is one of the all-time, great locker room, just awesome dudes in there. And you never want to see that guy leave. All right. What else we got? Has Mike Wall ever told you what goes on when reviewing film? Example, Josh Myers whiff bad on a block. Do they get yelled at or asked to explain what they were doing? No, I didn't. I did ask him about Josh Myers today specifically, so you can go check out that video. But nothing specifically of that. But Mike and I can't know what's going on. Now he can know what happened when he made a mistake on the field and how his coaches talked to him, but we have no way of knowing when Josh Myers makes a mistake, how his coaches are talking to Josh. So that's just one of those things that's impossible to know. I'm sure they're coaching him up on it. I'm sure, Luke Butkus doesn't see Josh making a huge mistake on the field and is like, it's okay, buddy. We'll get him next time. I can tell how Butkus coaches on the field. He's not afraid to get after people when they do something wrong. I can tell you that wholeheartedly. So I'm sure he gets after him, but how that gets through and whether there's improvement or not, that's a totally different story. All right. So truth matters. Bakhtiari is a goner. You don't love Aaron Jones enough. Maybe I don't. Maybe that's true. Bakhtiari is a goner is a really tough one. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about this, but the injury issue is massive for Bakhtiari. There's a little hint from Goody yesterday of like, David has some decisions to make, and this is not a short-term injury for David. So those two things give me a hint of like, hey, maybe David's going to have to consider retirement, or maybe Green Bay is nudge, hoping that he considers retirement. The reason being, and why that could be, is if David is not healthy going into next year, they cannot just release him and get off of his cap hit. Because if they do so, David can file an injury grievance, potentially up for the entirety of his salary next year. And that becomes a nightmare where he plays or he doesn't play at all. He wins the injury grievance and you end up having $40 million in cap hit next year for him not even being on the team. The same thing goes where if you keep him on the roster, but have to start him on the PUP list, and then he gets through the PUP list, and then you take him off for 3 weeks to see if he can practice and he can't go, and you have to put him on IR the rest of the year. Same thing. $40 million gone next year, nothing he can do about it, and he can't play. You need him healthy in like the start of the year and passing every physical and ready to go if you want to release him. If you release him and he's hurt, again, injury grievance, and you run into a problem. So you want him healthy for one of two reasons. A, so that he's healthy and you can play him if you want, if that's your determination, or that he's healthy and you can go to him and say, hey, we're going to release you unless you restructure for something super cheap. And he says, no, I'm good. You release him and he can go play wherever he wants to play. But if he's not healthy, that becomes a massive issue. And you could end up having to pay him his full $40 million salary next year. $20 million's gone no matter what. $20 million is guaranteed. It's basically $20 million, but $20 million's gone no matter what. But his base salary, like the $21 million that's there on bonuses and remaining like roster bonuses and base salary, that is at risk if he's not healthy, that they could still have to pay him. And that becomes your true nightmare where another $21 million off the books that you can't spend on anything because it's being taken up by Bakhtiari, who is hurt. So that ends up being a huge issue as well. Let's see. Well, Richard, thank you very much. I was just looking for a question. All right. So when we want Packers content, we come to listen to you. Who did you listen for Packers content when you were younger? Oh, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I went to a lot of the, Journal Sentinel stuff and Press Gazette stuff. Obviously, when I was a kid, we got the newspaper delivered every day, and, going to the sports section of the newspaper. That shows my age here. But, and then obviously like in college and stuff, JS Online, reading all the beat writers, that was my primary form of Packers content. Really funny story. Somebody can share this with Aaron Nagler someday. I don't think I've ever shared this with him. When I first got on Twitter, which was I think 2011, so about 12 years ago, people were telling me like, "Oh, you've got to follow this Aaron Nagler. You've got to follow this Aaron Nagler. Like, you should check him out. You'll really like him." And I'm like, why would I possibly follow anyone that isn't like on like the Packers beat or like actually like with the team, whatever. And I was like super like I'm like I don't need any of that. Like I just want it like right from the source. And then of course I quickly followed Aaron Nagler, and he was one of the best follows, and still is one of the best follows. But at first I'm like, all I need is the beat. That's all I need is just the beat stuff. I don't need anything else. But yeah, that's how I kind of started. But as time went on, obviously diversified quite a bit, and obviously became somebody who was not on the beat and wrote about Packers stuff all the time for a while. So but that's how it started out. A lot of Journal Sentinel stuff. Omar, yeah, they can beat the Rams this Sunday. Football is weird. Bad teams beat good teams all the time, and teams that are not favored to win all the time. The Rams are not a good football team. They might be without Matthew Stafford. So yeah, of course, they can absolutely win this game. Should they win this game? Or, is it a pretty win? Is it a decisive win? Is it one that you can be proud of? That's something totally different. Is it repeatable? Can they take what they do against the Rams if they win and repeat it in future games? That's something that we'll have to take a look at. But yeah, they can win this Sunday. And I don't think it's going to be anything that out of the ordinary or question. They're favored to win by Vegas. But if they play the way that they have for the past 4 weeks, they can easily get smoked by the Brett Rippon-led Rams too. Like that's within the realm of possibility. Just not a very good football team. And when you're not a good football team, you can lose to bad teams, as we've seen against the Raiders specifically. But I'm hopeful that they come out and play better this week, get some points in the first half, show a better competitive spirit, and hopefully pick up a win against the Rams. This one's easy, Kevin. Easiest answer I will give. I would hire Mike Wall as the offensive line coach. That is how I would personally fix the Packers offensive line. If you're looking as like move this person here and that person there, I don't think moving anything is going to change anything. I think they just need a little bit better fundamentals, footwork, and I'm all in. Hire Mike Wall. That'll fix the rest. Nick, enjoy the game, my friend. It was supposed to be rainy for a while. I think they changed the forecast now. I don't think it's supposed to rain anymore. I read this the opposite at first, and I thought you said LaFleur has never beaten McVay. I'm like, he's beaten him multiple times. But no, you're right. I don't think McVay has ever beaten LaFleur. So hopefully they can keep that streak going this weekend. Truth matters. With Rasul Douglas traded and Ford hurt, their secondary is awfully thin. Thin with high-end talent, sure. They have plenty of bodies because at corner, they still have Jair. They still have Valentine, Nixon, Ballantyne, and Robert Rochelle. So they've got 5 corners on the active roster, even with Rasul Douglas traded. At safety, even if Ford can't go and Savage is out, they still have Anthony Johnson Jr. They still have Dallin Levitt. They have Zane Anderson. We could see Zane Anderson this week. And of course, they've got Jonathan Owens as well. So they have 9 defensive backs, which is usually what you kind of go into a game with anyway. So from a pure numbers standpoint, they have plenty of defensive backs to go into the game. Now, how talented and good those players are that are in, that we can have an easy debate about and talk about it being thin or maybe not good enough. But they have 9 players to play this week. And wouldn't shock me if like an Ennis Gaines got called up where he can play on teams. He's got safety experience. He's got corner experience, and that kind of covers you there as well. But they have enough players, that's for sure. Family Lee, happy hour is your favorite time of day. I totally understand that, my friend. Richard, I saw this one earlier. Sorry I didn't get to it. Our 2020 draft class isn't looking good. Do you think the 2020 draft was weak overall for other teams, with exception to the top first-round picks? I'd have to go back at it. I think if I remember correctly, the overarching theme was that 2020 draft wasn't very good. And you have to remember, too, that was COVID year draft, right? Or no, that was prior to it was a COVID draft, I think, but they still got their full evaluations from 2019. So 2021 was the one where the 2020 class or the 2020 year in college was short and weird. if I remember correctly. But yeah, I'd have to go back and look at it a little bit further, Richard. And unfortunately, don't know the full 300 some draft picks from the 2020 class off the top of my head. But I think if I do remember correctly, I think the class overall was not as good when you look back at it. They have the bodies in the secondary. They just have to stay off the penalty stat sheet. Fair enough. Is Anthony Johnson Jr. strictly a safety, or could he get reps at a corner if necessary? I mean, if it was an emergency situation, he could probably go in at corner in a super big pinch, but I don't think they would do that unless they absolutely had to. I mean, so let's say you have 5 corners in the game, right? You've got all the 5 we just mentioned, Rochelle, Ballantyne, and the 3 starters. If 2 of those guys go down and you need a dime corner, I would guess it's probably Anthony Johnson Jr. And now it's Rudy Ford and Zane Anderson, Jonathan Owens and Zane Anderson, or Jonathan Ford and Dallin Levitt as your safeties. That would be my guess. But I don't think there's any realistic way, barring a bunch of injuries, that Anthony Johnson Jr. gets in at corner. 2020 was the virtual draft, yes, but they still had 2019 as a full season of watching all the college players and doing all their scouting trips and getting all of their evaluations that they needed. So you can't blame it that they didn't have enough to go off of to evaluate it. But yes, it was the virtual draft, but they still kind of went through all of their normal process in 2019 to evaluate the players. Yes, he did play slot in college, but again, unless there's an emergency situation, I don't think he would get back there. But of all the safeties, if you needed a corner, yes, Anthony Johnson Jr. would be the guy. I like Ballantyne. Hope he does well. Want to see some of Anthony Johnson Jr. to the 7th rounder. Yeah, I'm there with you. I would be very excited to watch Carrington Ballantyne and Anthony Johnson Jr. play the full game if that's what ends up happening this week. I mean, Ballantyne will, barring an injury. And if Anthony Johnson Jr. gets that playing time too, that's awesome. All of those snaps are super valuable to just kind of get a look at both guys, see what they can do in a full game. Ballantyne got attacked pretty heavily against Denver and Russell Wilson, specifically on some 3rd down plays early in the game. But I really think that he's a fun player, and I'm excited to see more of him. Obviously, Rasul was playing amazing football, and you're not going to replace that in a week. But I do think Ballantyne's very talented, and I'm excited, and hopefully he can learn on the job a little bit. All right, a couple more, then I'm going to get out of here, guys. Do I think the players interpreted the Rasul trade as the org saying we don't believe in this team this year? I mean, maybe, but these guys are professionals. You're 2-5. So what I kind of wish Goody would have said, and I know he can't just like come out and say this, but I think what he has to do is, like, his job is looking at the future of the team. He can't be married to one season. Now, you can be upset with him for him saying, like, when he's answering a question, being like, hey, we're just looking ahead to the Rams this week, and cool on Wildy for calling him out and being like, well, if you're looking just to the Rams this week, that Rasul Douglas guy would probably help you. But Good's job is to right now look at this team and say wholeheartedly, like, yeah, you're not competing this year. And I would hope that the players in the room are understanding enough to be like, hey, you know what? If you don't want to have guys traded away at the trade deadline, don't be 2-5 at the trade deadline. Like, you got to go out and win games. If you want to go out and be a buyer at the deadline, be 6-1 at the trade deadline, be 5-2 at the trade deadline, and then you can be a buyer. If you're 2-5 at the trade deadline, we're well past this now. Like, we know what the NFL and what, like, GMing 101 is when your window is closed and it's shut closed and you don't have a chance anymore. All right, you look at the future. When's the next window that we can open? That's just smart GMing. And now we can make a strong argument of like how Rasul's impact on like the younger players was maybe important to keep him around. I'm totally cool with having that conversation. And I think there's something legitimate to that, and keeping some of those guys around to help bring up this younger class of players is important too. But if you're a player, like, you got to know you're 2-5, like these things are going to happen. And if you didn't want it to happen, you better play better football up until that point to make sure that it doesn't happen. I don't think it's quite there yet. I think they're still going out with everyone to win, period. Like, they're trying to get a win this week. The coaching staff and everyone involved is trying to put their best people on the field to win the football game. But there does come a point where you make those decisions of like, all right, we don't need to see If you made the decision that John Runyon Jr. is not going to be on the team next year, well, then let's look at Sean Ryan. If you made the determination that Yosh Nijman's not going to be on the team anymore next year, all right, then let's look at Rasheed Walker even more and let's stop that battle. If you made the determination Rudy Ford or Jonathan Owens aren't going to be back, all right, let's take a look at Anthony Johnson Jr. a little bit more. So it gets to a little bit more preseason-y at the end of the year, and I promise you it's going to get there at some point. I don't think it's quite there yet, but we're already going to start seeing a little bit of it. Aaron, I'm going to get to your super chat in one moment. Smart GMing got us here. No, the GMing I'm just talking about did not get you here. The GMing that got you here was borrowing a bunch from future salary caps to keep feeding the 2022 and 2023 team. And what I was very adamant about at the time the 2021 and 2022 teams. But the thing that I was frustrated at the time is if you're going to do that, if you're going to mortgage the future from a salary cap standpoint, keep going. Like they tried to have their cake and eat it too, specifically in 20, when you start looking at replacement players in Jordan Love, AJ Dillon for Aaron Jones and Aaron Rodgers, where you're getting their like successors or what you're trying to get as their successors when your window is still open. And then you are keeping guys like Vernon Scott on the 53-man roster as a red shirt for the entire season when you desperately need high-end special teams players on the year, and you lose that year in an all-in year because of special teams. They never went all in quite enough, and you ended up in this bizarro no man's land. So no, I disagree. I don't think the GMing 101 today is when you're all in, you are all the way in. You push that button all the way to extreme, and you take every chance and every opportunity that you get to fill that roster with the best players. And if that means that you have to sacrifice Vernon Scott here and there so that you can add some extra veteran leadership on your special teams or whatever you need, you do it. If that means that you trade away some future first and second round picks so that you can get some higher first and second round picks or some players that can help you win now, you do it. They never they never pushed that lever to all the way in. They did it from a salary cap standpoint, but never all the way overall. And then, they immediately then go back in the opposite direction, and they never go completely all out. They trade away Rodgers, they trade away Devontae, but you still end up with these group of veterans that are still taking up this huge chunk of salary on the roster as well. So I am more of the 100 or 0. Give me an A, give me an F. Don't ever give me a B or a C. And I don't think they ever did that. And the same thing that I'm talking about next year of if I'm doing it, and you can be very thankful that I'm not. I saw somebody in the chat say Andy Herman for GM. No, that's probably a really bad idea. But if I'm doing it, I want all extreme too. I want all of those awful contracts off my books by the end of next year. Preston, Bakhtiari, Aaron Jones, any of those contracts that are taking up huge money, I want off the books by the end of next year. Now in 2025, we can have a fresh slate with no massive, awful contracts on the books, no dead cap hits, no nothing like that. 2024, you had 3 top 50 picks, potentially a top 5 pick. Like now you can start trending in the right direction, but give me an A, give me an F. Don't give me anything in between, because you're going to end up in no man's land with your classic Jeff Fisher 8 and 9 bullshit is what you're going to end up with. So that's my spiel on it. All right, Aaron, and then I'm probably going to get out of here. Could you see Green Bay trade for an offensive coordinator like Todd Monken? They have done it in the past with Holmgren. Trading for an offensive coordinator, no. And I don't think you can do that anymore, if I remember correctly. But could they hire a Todd Monken as a head coach? Maybe. Could they hire a Ben Johnson as a head coach? Maybe. Could they hire an Aaron Glenn from Detroit as a head coach? Or Brian Flores from Minnesota as a head coach? Maybe. But they have to make the determination on Matt LaFleur first before they get to anything like that. But if they do, that'll be very interesting to see what kind of coaches that they look at when they make their next hire. All right. That might be true. That might be true. I think he would like to coach though, but who knows? Maybe I'll ask him next week. I asked him once if he would take the Bears job if it opened, the head coaching job, if somebody came and called him like they called Jeff Saturday last year, and he said he would, but who knows? All right, guys, that's going to do it for me. I appreciate you guys a ton. Always fun chatting with you guys. Fun happy hour. Went a little bit longer than I was expecting because it was too much fun. I will see you next week for happy hour for sure. I don't think we're going to have a Pack-A-Day live next week. I think, unfortunately, I have a conflict. I'm going to see if there's something I can move around, but it's not looking promising. I am going to do a post game. No, it's a home game this week. So probably no post game chat this week. We'll see what time I get home. That's up in the air. But of course, 365 days a year, new episode, new podcast every single day. Great chat with Mike Wall today. If you haven't checked it out yet, check out Pack-A-Day Podcast memberships, bonus episodes, commercial free, first to the episode. I think, people that were members, I think got the Mike Wall episode at like 4 p.m. yesterday rather than waiting for 5 a.m. this morning. So a lot of really cool opportunities. Had some awesome chats already today with some Hall of Fame members. You get a 15-minute monthly chat either via Zoom or phone call. I'm really enjoying those conversations, so you can look into that as well. But just really appreciate all the support and you guys coming to these live happy hours, checking out the videos every day, and just every way that you're showing support. It means a ton to me. But I'll see you guys soon. Until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.